Herzlich willkommen zum UnleashPeople Podcast, dem Podcast für alle, die HR und Talent Acquisition strategisch denken. Wir, Ina und Christian, liefern euch gemeinsam mit Expertinnen und Experten regelmäßig frische Insights, die euch und euer Unternehmen voranbringen. Heute sprechen wir mit Badaluta, einem Experten in Talent Sourcing und Speaker, darüber, was Talent Sourcing eigentlich ist. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the UnleashPeople podcast. Today we have a guest online who is very dear to me, Alex, because Alex was a teammate of mine a few months or probably a year ago, and Alex managed everything in my recruiting team that was related to talent sourcing. And that is the topic today. As well, you might think, Alex and I will speak about sourcing. So, Alex, speaking about sourcing, what is it for you? What's your definition of talent sourcing in recruiting?
Hi, Christian. Thanks a lot for the lovely introduction. And thank you also for inviting me to be here. When it comes to sourcing, what is sourcing for me? That's a very broad topic interesting to think about it, because then again, what I see sourcing more is more of a sales function rather than anything else. Because, when we have recruitment usually makes sure that the different processes and procedures that we have in the hiring system are being maintained and are being kept compliant. We have sourcing who are basically at the forefront of bringing and representing bringing candidates to the company and presenting the company out there on the market. So the way that I see sourcing would be more around a number of people who are making the best to show what a great culture a company has and what would be the benefit of people joining in that company. Similar like a sales function. So I want to emphasize a bit more, because during today's conversation, I would like to make lots of parallels between what a sales function has and what also the recruitment team would have.
I see. So you're basically trying to catch people who are not aware of whatever, the company, exactly, the product, the role. I see. Good. But how do you do that? Because that's the magic that happens somewhere in the background, right? And
yeah,
I don't think sourcing, or at least as I understand it, sourcing is not about advertisement, right? You do not put ads somewhere and do whatever paid marketing, but what's exactly then the purpose of talent sourcing?
Very good question. When I go into different intake meetings with hiring managers in order to understand the position, I actually start with this sentence. I'm telling them, well, I'm here because posting and praying doesn't work, and we need to go out there on the market and engage with passive candidates in trying to get them on board to join us. What are passive candidates? Passive candidates are suitable people that might be able to do this position, but that are very happy in their current position. They are not necessarily interested in changing their job. And that's where we also need to come in to convince them. So in order to build a compelling story and in order to build a good message for these prospects, what we usually do, we start with very good and organized and structured intake meeting, where we ask different questions when it comes about what would be the ideal candidate, what would their main impact within the organization, what would they need to achieve in the next 6 months to 1 year, what benefits and growth opportunities they would have, and also what people they would be working with. And by using this message, then we're able to compile a very convincing message that then we reach out to people in order to convince them to join us in our organization.
I need to laugh. Sorry, I really think it's so funny because from what you said about the intake meeting, the kickoff meeting, somehow you could tell that the two of us collaborated in the past, because basically you preach what I keep preaching every single day. Make a proper kickoff/intake meeting to be able to find the right person. It's just nice that somehow it's stuck.
Yeah. No, but it's right. It's important, and it's also important in order to understand and realize exactly why it hasn't worked in the past with the past candidates. That's also another question I usually ask the hiring team. What was missing from the candidates you had so far?
Mm.
Because that's also important before we start sourcing to understand exactly why it hasn't worked. Maybe actually the client doesn't need sourcing in this case. Maybe the problem is that somewhere in the middle between the first stage and the second stage, there's a disconnect between the hiring team and the hiring manager. In each case, if we don't solve it up front, their use sourcing will not have any impact over there because it's going to bring candidates that are good with the hiring manager but not good with the rest of the hiring team. So that's the first step that we need to fix. But I'm deviating a bit from the subject. But yeah, it's important that before we start looking for, the hiring team understands what they're looking for, and also the recruitment team understands what we're looking
Yeah. But it's important, right, to speak about that. Coming back to sourcing itself.
Yeah.
What do you do the whole day? Do you just sit there and wait for candidates? How does sourcing in real life really look like? What are your tasks? How do you kind of find people? How do you make sure that those people actually bring what you're looking for? How does that work?
Good question. So it's a bit more than just scrolling on LinkedIn all day and then see what we get. When it comes to identification, I think in terms of percentage of time allocated to identification, it's quite low. So maybe it's like 10 to 20%. Nowadays we have, I'm quite lucky. So I have access to LinkedIn Corporate Recruiter. It's a very expensive license that makes my life much easier. But even if we wouldn't have access to this license, there are many different solutions out there that you can use in order to identify the people that we need. So I think lots of people might know about Boolean search. Boolean search is a combination of different variables that you can use on browsers and generally on different other search engines in order to build strings of different keywords, and then it's going to show you a list of results that fit those keywords. So to give an example on top of my mind, you can simply say Java and that would be a string within brackets. And then after closing the brackets, write inside LinkedIn. You write this string on Google, and then you're going to get lots of different results on Google of people that have those skill sets posted on their profile and that are on LinkedIn, which is quite useful in order to go a bit around the free limit that LinkedIn has of only 25 profiles that you can see on a search. So this will be one part that we're doing in terms of sourcing, like in the identification part. And I think here there are multiple different school of thoughts. So I met different sourcers that are basing most of their strategy around this, going very deep into this Boolean search part, going into different websites, just Stack Overflow or GitHub or GitLab. I'm not sure if you can still source on GitLab. I'm not sure. Anyway, but on GitHub you can still source, and trying to find different profiles that might not have that big of a digital footprint on other pages such as LinkedIn, and engaging with those people. So they build a whole philosophy and whole strategy around this identification part, even sometimes going to open source intelligence techniques and trying to find contact information for people that might have written different PhDs on sites and finding engaging with these people. Then there comes the part of engagement. When it comes to engagement, going back to the comparison with sales that I did before, it's a lot of cold outreaches. You need to make the message interesting, starting exactly from the title. because that's the first thing people read, the title. If it's not compelling and interesting enough, they're not going to open it. And into the message, getting straight to the point and communicating exactly what they want to hear and making it easier to read. Most of the people who read these messages from the phone, like the job ads, they need to be easy to read. And then finally having a call to action, trying to schedule them on the call where you're going to sell even further on why this position is a good fit. This identification part, as I said, it takes me around 20% of the time, but I think most of the time I actually spend on speaking with people. I'm trying to have between 5 and 10 calls a week with different people. Why so many or so few, depending on the perspective, is because I don't want to reach out to people if I don't know 90% sure that they're a fit. I think, as you said, Christian, many times, when it comes to the funnel, it's important that you have it efficient. If you speak with 100 people a week, and then out of those 100 people, only 5 actually pass through the final interview stage, then it means that we waste a lot of time with 95 people because they were not a fit, and we knew that from the beginning. Whilst if we speak with 5 people and 3 of them end up in the final stage, then that's a bit more efficient. Yeah, so I would say that if I am to summarize a bit to a certain extreme, very, very simply, what sourcing does, I would say this is pretty much it. We're taking care of the top of the funnel, making sure that the top of the funnel is being filled with applications of people that would be suitable for this position, and then also briefing them on how the interview process would look like. I think this is very important so that people would understand what they can expect from the recruitment process. It's very important from the sourcer to understand from the intake meeting how the recruitment process looks like, so that we will be able to speak with John Doe once we connect with him as a candidate for the position, that, hey, this you can expect from this interview process, a first stage with the hiring manager, the credibility assessment, and then finally an on-site panel with the product management, principal software engineer, and our testing team.
Got it. So you mentioned one thing that kind of rang a bell with me again. You spoke about, let's rephrase it to quantity versus quality, because sometimes I hear, and I was a bit trained that ages ago in that direction as well, that it's super helpful to reach out to as many people as possible, and through the quantity you increase, let's say, the chances that at least one person is among them that could kind of fit the job and who's also interesting, right? So you need to reach out to, I don't know, 1,000 people to be able to fill your role. Out of experience and what I heard from you, this is not the case, and it actually doesn't make sense, because you waste so much time in finding and refining and everything related to sourcing, that you spend days and weeks on a single role, and in the end you do not find anybody, because we actually don't know whom you're looking for, right? If the funnel is so broad, you just fill in everybody and everything and hope that it's going to work. So basically it's a more expensive version of post and pray. For me, the frustration level is super high as well, because you just speak or you send out thousands, hundreds of messages, and you don't hear back. Because how can you, if you kind of address every Java developer in Germany for a JavaScript role, because they are engineers, right? It's not going to work. So how do you make sure that you reach out to the right people first? And second, how do you really make sure that they answer back to you, or at least a certain percentage answers back to you. That's the quality piece. And how do you measure, right? What are, let's say, measurements, conversion rates that are good in the sourcing piece?
Yeah, super good question. And I totally agree with what you said about the error that some people in the recruitment industry do when they think that the bigger the net, then the more likely we're gonna find people. I think that's a bit of a mistaken hypothesis, because first of all, when you reach out to 100 people, even if you have like 20 people replying, you need to handle 20 candidates, which doesn't allow you to give a very good candidate experience. And then when you go out and say that, okay, for each position, we're going to reach out to at least 100 people, you're coming from a point of view where you think that the market is unlimited, which is not true. The market is very much limited, and you need to treat it as a sparse resource, because if you have one candidate having a bad experience with you, then other people are going to find out, which in the end is going to make it that no one's going to answer to your message anymore. But getting back to the question that you mentioned, how do I identify, how do I make sure that the people I reach out to are fit to the position? This again goes back to the intake meeting. I'm trying to understand exactly how a good engineer would look like. And then that comes in terms of like understanding sentences from their responsibility. Okay, thinking here as a first example, let's say we're looking for a C++ engineer. That's great, but there are so many variants of C++ engineer. They might all use the same technology, but one C++ engineer might be working on building different visualization systems. In that case, I know that this C++ engineer might need to be coming from an environment where he had to build dashboards for people to view by using Qt or Qt, or by working in different environments such as the gaming development. They might be building simulation engines. Again, over here, the game development example still stands, because when it comes to game development, you need to work a lot with simulation. But not necessarily on the visualization side, rather more on the physics side. So we also might be looking for people that understand concepts of physics. We might be looking for general C++ engineers to build different softwares that would help with sensor fusion. Then I know I'll be looking for also different companies and industries that are coming from this environment. So I think in order to find the right candidates, you also need to have a very good understanding of the market, to understand what is there out there in the market beyond just the industry that you're working in, and to understand where that similar skill set is being applied into. Giving an example over here, at one point we were looking for a computer vision engineer, and I was surprised to find out that Domino's was applying different computer vision techniques in order to analyze if the pizzas that they're making are of the right, the recipe has been followed and they have the right amount of ingredients. The same computer vision techniques that are being applied in autonomous driving cars. You also need to understand the applicability of the technology in different industries. And I like what you mentioned also, switching to the next idea, I like what you mentioned about the conversion rates. I think that's a good measure in trying to understand how efficient your funnel is. Always having a look on conversion rate. So if when you reach out to people, you get around 35% of people replying that they're interested. Not only applying, let's say 40% reply rate is a very healthy response rate. 30% being interested is super good. That means if you reach out to 10 people, you have 3 candidates. Ideally, out of those 3 candidates, the hiring manager wants to meet them all, and then he selects 2 candidates to go to the final stage. That's amazing. Your final stage should be good if, I would say, 50% of the people reaching the final stage pass the final stage. Because then it means that there's a very good alignment between the hiring panel and what the hiring manager is looking for, and whatever the hiring manager votes that as being good, then also the hiring team just needs to check some details, and then in half of the cases they would go on. That would be good conversion rates to follow.
Yeah, you're right, and you also bring up a very important topic, because in the past I did it myself. I changed that approach, but in general, sourcing teams mostly are measured by hires.
Yeah.
And that, if you look at it really properly, it doesn't make sense, because how can you influence a hiring decision in the end, right? So even when you're the best sourcer on the globe, you still cannot influence the final decision of the hiring manager, and you actually cannot control everything, right? And you cannot know everything. Evaluating the success of a sourcing team by its hires is not, for me, not the right way to approach it, right?
Yeah.
And then you also brought up then, let's say, the good way of doing it, and that is how many candidates did reach a certain stage, right? Let's say final stage, if we have a recruiting process that has both ads and sourcing, you can say at least one or two candidates should come from the sourcing team in the final interview round, because the rest you cannot control. There are so many factors that you just don't know at the beginning. We are still speaking about top of funnel, right? It's the very beginning of the recruiting process, not the end. And still, with the knowledge you have and what you're doing in sourcing, usually you manage to have to identify candidates who make it to the very last stage. That in itself is already a very good deed, right? And it shows the skills of a sourcer.
Yeah.
So
and as a comment to what you mentioned about like the sources being assessed by the number of hires, it might be a bit unfair to set like a target of sourced hires for a team of sourcers, because each sourcer would be handling different types of positions.
Yeah.
One sourcer would be handling more blue-collar positions, or more positions that are a bit more ramping up. In this case, they would have more hires than someone that's dealing with principal software engineers or senior management. As I said, I'm going to make lots of comparisons with the sales department in an organization. Sales development representative is never assessed by the amount of contracts that they sign, rather by the amount of annual recurring revenue that they manage to secure. The same with outsourcing. One principal software engineer might equal the same annual recurring revenue or impact in the organization as maybe 10 blue-collar workers.
Yes, sure. But that also implies that everybody needs to fully understand the business model. That's a completely different story. And I don't want to start speaking about that today, because it will lead us nowhere, at least not in this conversation. Another thing that you mentioned is expertise. When I was moving into recruiting / sourcing, the sentiment was everybody can do sourcing, which might be true because you need to learn somehow, right? But in the end, in my opinion, also sourcers need to specialize rather sooner than later, because how can you understand the roles you're recruiting for if you don't know the tools, the coding languages your team uses, right? And a good sourcer brings much more into the business than just candidates. You bring intelligence, real life market intelligence. And I have an example that I will never forget from one of my previous jobs, right? we had an office in France, an engineering office, and they were looking for PHP engineers all of the time. You can think about PHP what you want, that's not the topic today, but we were running out of suitable candidates for the Paris office because like PHP is the thing in France when it comes to specific applications. So my thinking was, yeah, easy, just let's expand the circle around France and start source in other countries. So I told my team, yeah, go to Spain, source PHP engineers in Spain. There must be a lot of people, and they started, and the outcome was literally zero, because we learned during like a week of really looking into it, PHP is not a thing in Spain. They don't use it. So it was, the outcome itself was maybe not good because I spent the capacity of my team for a full week into find candidates in Spain that don't exist, but we learned a lot, right? We learned if we are looking for PHP people, don't look in Spain. It's not worth the effort, right? And that's also a lot of information that you collect for your business, for your recruiting function, for everything, right? Because if we run into a similar problem in the future and we open for whatever reason, as an example, a PHP coding hub in Germany, I know I can start sourcing in France because there are a lot of people who know the job, right? Who know the technology. And I don't need to look into Spain because there are no people there. And those are very important bits and pieces that help you define your search strategy from the very beginning. So sourcing is not only finding candidates, and I cannot emphasize it big enough, right? Sourcing will build your backbone when it comes to recruiting strategy. Where do I find the most suitable persons for this role? They will know also salaries, they know specific cities, they know companies, right? And they also know those kind of weird things that you mentioned, that Domino's, the pizza company, has vision experts in their teams, right? We can kind of move from food processing to automotive or to whatever, right? And that's the knowledge that you get into your company if you have a very good and well-established sourcing team. And that is also something that the two of us worked on, Alex, in the past. Sourcing is not a support function. Sourcing is a function that is on eye level with all other teams you have in your recruiting team, because it delivers information and it delivers candidates, and it just helps you improve your recruiting overall. And
exactly.
That's
And all the information that you mentioned, I know that for this kind of information, companies pay a lot of money to different consulting agencies in order to get their hands on this information when they already have it within the organization. So let's say hypothetically, a company wants to expand their operations to a different country, and over there they want to hire 1,000 Java professionals. But then the country is rather, not that popular. It's not as big as it would be with Germany or Poland. Give an example over here. Let's say they want to expand to Hungary. They would either pay a consultancy company to check what would be the viability of that market in order to find so many Java engineers. Or if they have a sourcing team, they can ask the sourcing team to make a data analysis of the market. So you're right. I think when it comes to sourcing, teams in different organizations, they pose a real asset for companies to tap into if they have that sourcing. what I've seen, unfortunately, on the market, there has been a trend where sourcing is being seen as a junior recruitment position, which
Yeah.
is not ideal because, as you mentioned, for one sourcer to manage to gain all this information, understand how the markets work, they need lots of experience, lots of expertise that's being built over the years. If
Yeah.
the only way that we see sourcing is that they go into an organization, they work 1 year as a sourcer where they report to a recruiter, and then later on they get promoted into recruitment. First of all, you're not building that expertise, and second of all, you're not also encouraging building that expertise, because then from the start the message is clear. Okay, if I want to grow in this company, I need to do everything else but not sourcing. I need to become better at recruitment. I need to become better at coordination. I need to become better at hiring manager interviews, but not at sourcing. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And that's that's the challenge all organizations face. And if you want to implement sourcing into your recruiting process or into your even HR organization, right?
Yeah.
You need to take a strategic decision, and you also need to make sure that sourcing has the standing that it needs to have to be able to really leverage the impact sourcing can have. And if you set it up properly, you will win massively when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to finding the right candidates, when it comes to speed as well, right? Because you can start sourcing way before publishing a role. For instance, you can also use sourcing if you cannot publish a role and you don't need to pay a lot of money for headhunters or agencies if you have it set up properly in your organization. And that's the big challenge that I have seen, and I struggled with it as well, right? Because when do you start sourcing? When do you carve out the sourcing piece from full life cycle recruiting and set up a distinct team within talent acquisition that focuses only on sourcing? Because sourcing is not, you don't need sourcing if you hire 8 people per year, right?
Yeah.
You don't need it, and you don't need sourcing if you have quite common roles. Let's phrase it like that. But if you have niche roles, if you have specialist roles, if you move into a, let's say, extended hiring period where you kind of scale up recruiting, then it really makes sense. And yeah, depending on how you set it up, you also have different wins you can realize, but that's something, unfortunately, we need to postpone and speak about later, because we are already running out of time. And as a small teaser, today you might have realized that we did not mention AI a single time until now. There is a specific reason for that, because Alex and I decided that we will do another episode that is completely focusing on AI in talent sourcing, because that for sure will fill another 30 minutes easily. And before I really wrap up everything, Alex, one last tip from your end. How would you or what is your recommendation to recruiting organizations when it comes to sourcing? How would you set it up from a sourcer's perspective?
That's a very good question. I think what's important is that the sourcer would be on equal foot as with the recruiter and HRBP. The reason behind that is because sourcers need to have the equal trust from the business as recruiters receive, and also the HRBPs. So they would have a bigger impact if they're being empowered to act autonomously, and they would not need the backing of the other parties inside of HR. And when organizations think about, okay, especially large organizations, when they think, okay, now we're ramping up, but maybe in a couple of years we're not going to be ramping up anymore. What should we do with the sourcing function? think that besides of the sourcing function being experts in the outside market, they also become experts in what's happening in the organization. You're going to have the chance to build different pipelines that would be applicable to different organizations, different departments. So it's not only one department that's hiring for Java engineers. You might have 3 or 4 that there could also become in the future, when you're not hiring that much, internal mobility experts, because they know what talent fits in which parts of the organization. So I think in order to understand how the talent market looks both outside the organization and inside the organization, any organization needs a very strong sourcing function.
Thank you, Alex. I specifically like the internal mobility aspect because that's something that people tend to overlook, right? Completely. You also have people internally who can do stuff that another department needs, even another business unit, right? You can move people around in a way. So that's very, very helpful advice, Alex. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights. And also thank you very much for joining me. It was a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, everybody else, stay tuned for the coming episode on Gen AI in sourcing, whenever that will happen. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Das war's für heute. Vielen Dank, dass ihr bis zum Ende dabei geblieben seid und bis zum nächsten Mal.